discussion is solo aging, and we've got it's one of my favorite topics. Whoops, it's one of my favorite topics, but but my other favorite thing is real life stories, because I think there's a lot to be had about, looking at checklists and reading an article on a specific topic. But what makes a huge difference is to hear how somebody makes individual decisions and the things that they're talking about. It's why, quite frankly, I like the interactive nature of these discussions so much, because you in the audience are always sharing great stories and resources and asking wonderful questions. So without further ado, let's welcome Beatrice Blatteis. Did I botch your last name, Beatrice?
You came very close.
How do
It's
you pronounce?
Blatteis.
What is it?
Blatteis.
Blatteis. Okay.
Blatteis.
That sounds a lot better. Yeah.
It's in German. It means leaf ice.
Oh,
So it's
nice.
like the frost on the leaves.
I love it. All right. Well, today we are talking about solo aging, and you've identified yourself as a solo ager. You wear that badge proudly, correct, Beatrice?
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
love it. And so I'm really intrigued to hear your story and any insights that you've gleaned that can help our community. I know you've got a PowerPoint. You sent it to me. Would you like me to run it, or would you like to run your PowerPoint off your
Why,
computer?
why don't I just run it? Yeah,
Okay,
if
great.
that's all right.
And normally, folks, I say, hey, Beatrice, let's get to know you a little bit better. But I know that you're going to tell your story in your PowerPoint. So I say we just jump right into it.
Exactly. I think that sounds terrific.
All right. So I'm going to duck behind the curtains here once we know that you're all locked and loaded. And then I want to remind everybody in our audience that you can ask questions and you can make comments. And we already have Jan and Christine, sort of sending up some flares that how excited they are about this discussion. But I'll let you take it away, Beatrice. And if you want to check in with me after a few slides, and I'll let you know if there's any questions or what have you. And I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's great to be with you. So, uh, absolutely, I want you to ask questions, you, Steve, and the audience. Don't be fooled. The PowerPoint is mostly pictures of my beautiful new home in San Miguel de Allende. Um, so this is it. Isn't it beautiful? These are the jacaranda trees,
Wow.
jacarandas,
Now,
and
what time of year was that taken?
it's about a month from now. So we have an early spring here. And the jacarandas are my favorite tree because my neither of my parents were originally American. My mother was Peruvian and my father a German Holocaust survivor. But I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, where Elvis lived.
Hmm.
And in Peru, there were these jacaranda trees in a beautiful park, or not a park, a square, where I would write poetry when I was a teenager. So they have a special place in my heart.
Oh,
And what
awesome.
you're looking at there is the Parroquia Church. It's not a cathedral because San Miguel is a very small town. So it doesn't have a bishop, but the Parroquia is the landmark and the one of the scenic sites of the area. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I got here because though this is the place I landed, I think my journey getting here is one shared by a lot of other solo agers. Um, and this is kind of what happened with me. My parents got old. And my sister got cancer, And both of those things convinced me and my then husband to move back from the San Francisco Bay Area in California, where I spent all of my adult life. From college at Stanford University, I just stayed. And when I was getting out of college, the Apple microcomputer, the first Macintosh was coming out, and it was the birth of the microcomputer. And like those, young people today who keep us straight on social media, I was a young person who was interested enough in technology. And so I grew up in the Bay Area as an adult. But when I went to be with my parents and my sister as a caregiver, many of you may be caregivers, challenging phase of life. I left all my network behind, all my friends. I had a lot of friends through my work. And I went to Memphis, Tennessee, where the lifestyle and the mindset is quite a bit different from the San Francisco Bay Area. I knew what I was getting up into. I grew up there, but it was still a shock. And so with great relief, I can tell you that my sister outlived her diagnoses. She's not in remission, but she has not had a cancer recurrence in 3 years. It's been 10 years since they told her she had less than a 2% chance to survive. And so we're very happy about that. And as soon as she got better, my husband and I divorced. And shortly thereafter, my mother got cancer. And then my dog died. So it was a series of losses, which happens to a lot of people at this stage of life, whether you're a solo ager or some other kind of ager with children or spouse. And so I had a lot of stress, and I was also caregiving, of course, because as my mother got sick, and my dog, before he died, went blind and he got diabetes and went blind. So got some extra caregiving chores there. And so out of that stress, I didn't know the reason at the time, just as COVID was coming, and I lived alone. After my divorce, I was living with my dog until he left. And all of those things gave me what I now know to be vestibular migraines, which means you get dizzy. You're dizzy all the time, like the world is spinning. And so then I couldn't work. So then I had more stress. And although my dad outlived my mother by 3 years, and I was grateful, very grateful for that. Once I lost him, I was pretty, I think the way Steve put it in his advertising was that it was an unlivable life. I was not working. After not working for, it turned out to be 4 years. My budget was shot, and without my parents and husband and dog and Bay Area friends, I was very lonely. And so that was the beginning of my thinking, okay, I got to do something. What am I going to do? How do I change this? And in parallel with that, besides being out of work, I have always been a self-employed consultant, and leaving my network behind didn't do my business that much good either. So on the whole, I had seen what my sister and brother and I, there were 3 of us, did for my parents. They chose to age in place, which many solo agers do. We had toured some assisted livings. They absolutely refused. I thought they were being obstinate at the time. I was a little younger, not that much younger, but a little younger. And so that meant that my brother and sister and I picked up the slack. We were already paying $2,500 a month to a caregiver who helped my dad out 3 days a week for 4 hours each time, which is not enough. He was in a wheelchair at the end, so there were a lot of things he couldn't do. And my brother and I and sister, all three of us divided the chores, which ended up being about a 20-hour a week part-time job, except for every time he would go to the hospital with a crisis and then come out. And then we were like ICU nurses because it was COVID one of the times that he did that. And so it was challenging, and the light bulbs went off for me. Bam. And I've heard this from a lot of solo agers in particular, that when their parents were in their final years, they went, oh my God, who's going to do this for me? And that's pretty much what I was doing. So that is when I started to think, okay, I'm lonely. I don't have a big budget to go to assisted living, even if I wanted to. But I came to understand my parents' viewpoint, which was I don't want to hang out with a bunch of old people. And it's a mix, right? Regular life is a mix of different ages and different types of people. And so I finally got that. And so for me, it was the top two. I think that there are many things that solo agers have to think about differently. And just a side note, solo ager, I think of as a person without children or without a support network, where they're very clear who is going to come over and give them a bath when they can't afford to hire someone to do it, but it's too unsafe for them to do it. And so sometimes that's people with children who live far away. Often it's couples because one will die before the other, and then the last one standing will be the solo ager. But I think everybody in America is realizing, if you're not looking into prices of assisted living and home health aides, and Lord help you if you get dementia, the extra cost of dementia of memory care, then these two things, wanting a community and a close one, I can count on you kind of community when I can't drive myself to the doctor, or the cab can only leave me at the front door, not get me all the way to the 5th floor. So I think these are top two needs that everyone aging has to address, and it's a little tougher for people without kids. And then the other two are your health, because I got sick with dizziness, vertigo, much earlier than I expected to, and I got a preview of what being incapacitated might look like, and I already didn't have enough help. Now, part of that was because of COVID. But I really, there were a lot of things I needed. I couldn't get to the grocery store on the days I couldn't drive. And I remember getting on line and complaining to all my neighbors when the grocery store screwed up my delivery and I was going to run out of food. Just that for the night, but I was still peeved. So I think your health is something that people are in different stages of, and that has different implications. And the housing itself, like if you're already living in a place that you could age in place with, or if you have to move, or if you have to remodel, or, and this was very important to me in the contrast between San Francisco and Memphis, Tennessee, the kinds of community services available in the Bay Area and all of the choices for both housing and support were nothing like what was available in Tennessee. And I applied for Medicaid when I was quite sick and not working. And I got a letter that explicitly said that as a woman without children, I could not be funded in Tennessee. So there you have it. So the options as I see them, as I saw them then, and as I see them today for where to live, are co-housing, which I'm a big fan of. Golden Girls is a lot like co-housing. If you don't know about co-housing, it's a little bit like the old days commune, but for today's world, and different groups of people build a community to share resources and to help each other. And some of those are intergenerational, which is my particular interest. Golden Girls means you share a house. I have an article where I read that 5 women each bought a different house in a different country and made their own little private timeshare. Sometimes they all say, oh, let's all go meet up at Paris house. Other times they each stay in their own house, or they trade the houses. But you could just as easily, that's a little bit of my vision, having a nice big house with a lot of roommates to share, of different ages, because I would love to share with a young family who needs an additional grandmother to help babysit. And roommates, which is what I'm doing now. And then the abroad part came in because I went to a course in Baja, California about aging. And as soon as I crossed the border, I was like, oh my God, I've been living in the wrong country for my whole life. Because the energy and the way the people treated me was so dramatically different, just crossing the border and going to Baja, that I immediately saw the opportunity to solve my sense of isolation, but also of not really having a family. Um, I that Latin affection was something that my mother brought into our whole family, and living the Latin lifestyle was immediately clear is a much warmer experience. The fact that I have gray hair doesn't mean I become invisible. In fact, I'm all too visible because Mexican ladies dye their hair till they die. Um, but people would give up their seat, and I was like, oh, I remember in the old days this used to happen, and people would help me. And so I immediately realized a Hispanic situation would be great for me. And I have met many people here who didn't know a single word of Spanish and did not have a Latin heritage, and feel immediately the cultural differences. So there are 2 ways to be abroad, and you don't have to be full time. You can do what I do, which is I kind of travel around. I was just in Peru seeing my family for the first time in many, many years there. And my next spot in experimenting, where I'm going to land for the longest stretch, I'll be going to Spain, I hope. Or you can live full time, like some of my friends do here. They have wonderful houses because it's so much cheaper. And that was another huge consideration. I knew I was underfunded, so I needed to start spending less money. And I spend 1/10 of what I was spending in the US for living expenses. So I want to share a little bit about what my community looks like. This is my roommate. She's so young looking, it's really a problem.
Uh,
She's
Now,
she's 61.
Beatrice,
Yes,
out of curiosity, did you know your roommate before you made this move?
that's such a great question. That's part of what spurred me on when I went to this course. I got in touch with her sister. Her father and my father were really good friends. They met in Memphis, Tennessee, as colleagues, and became friends. And one summer in 1974, I met her, and I hadn't seen her since. But Latins being how they are, when I got in touch at my Baja course with her sister, first of all, she said, oh, You have to come visit us. I'm like, well, I haven't seen you in 48 years. Yes, but our fathers were best friends. You have to come and visit us in San Miguel de Allende because it's so beautiful.
Okay.
And so when I came to San Miguel, as a visitor, I told her that I was very interested in co-housing. And she said, "Oh my God, my sister is in co-housing, is interested in co-housing too. She's been talking about it for years." So we called her up and she goes, "Martha, Martha, Beatrice is interested in co-housing." And so Martha was living in Mexico City at the time. And she
Okay.
said, "I'll jump in my car and be there in 3 hours." And
Wow.
so
Wow. Well, good networking on you. A few questions. Let's see. Well, first off, Tiffany was asking, what is the name of the course that you're referencing?
I went to a course called Navigating Transitions with Modern Elder Academy.
Okay, Modern Elder Academy. I'll drop that into the chat for everybody. And then let's see. Rena asks, are you fluent in Spanish and have you experienced any cartel presence in San Miguel?
Great questions. I am fluent, so I have an unfair advantage there. However, many of my friends came here and still don't speak a lot of Spanish, but fortunately, because in San Miguel, unlike other cities, San Miguel is about 10% expats, and so that are both US and Canadian. And so a lot of people speak English here, but it's also a common language to learn. So I haven't found that to be a barrier. Um, the only thing I can tell you about the cartel is what I read in the paper about what happens in other cities. There are areas in Mexico where you know to stay away, and you'll find a lot of that at the very end. I've got some resources if you want to look into um, Mexico and what it's like to be an expat. But a lot of those online kind of resources will tell you don't go here, don't go there. What a lot of people do is join Facebook groups for expats in the community that they're living in and to see how safe it is. I feel so much safer here than I have anywhere in the United States at all, not just because of the cartel, but because there are no guns here. I mean, there are guns, the cartel have them, but regular people don't.
Okay.
If someone wants to rob you, they don't have a gun to do it with. They may have a knife, but
Let's see. Diana says, please, well, I know you've got more slides, but let me throw this question out and then
no,
we'll,
no rush. They're all
okay.
pictures,
Okay.
no problem.
Diana says, please talk about health insurance. I just returned from a wonderful year in San Miguel because I couldn't figure out health insurance for my 67-year-old self. So Diana, it sounds like you took a similar journey that I'm delighted that you're on here. But how are you working health insurance, Beatrice?
That's a really, really good question. It depends on your state of health and your pre-existing conditions. So they have a kind of insured. There are three ways you can be insured in Mexico. And just, disclosure, none of them work really well for me. That's part of my world tour for the long run. But for the short run, it's okay. There is a kind of insurance called expat health insurance. And the reason it's different than regular being insured in Mexico is that it gives you 180 days in the US, coverage in the US, as well as in Mexico in case you go back and forth. So that you're not covered 100% in Mexico and then go back to the US to, visit for a month at Christmas and then you have a problem. It's not that cheap. It's not as cheap as getting coverage with a company plan or with a healthcare marketplace plan, but it's not as expensive necessarily as US individual direct pay health insurance. They also have very cheap, good medical care here. So I needed to get a mammogram really quickly, actually an ultrasound, not a mammogram. And it cost me something like $65. And if I wanted to get an MRI, because I've been having a little problem with my hip, that would only cost me $300, just flat out pay.
Yeah, just
So
paying
many
out
of
of
my
pocket.
friends pay out of pocket. Now there is insurance, regular insurance, as any a Mexican would get, where you're covered here at a pretty reasonable cost. The trick and the problem is pre-existing conditions here will kill you. They'll exclude them or they'll rate you up, just like in the US before Obamacare. So regular insurance for an expat who becomes a Mexican resident would be like pre-Obamacare insurance in the US. So cost is the issue. You can get coverage, but cost is the issue. And if I were not on blood pressure medication, I wouldn't have any problem at all.
Okay.
But that gets me off the list for anything cardiac, which is what I'm wanting to have coverage for. So that's the skinny on that.
The and it's somebody is asking you had an ultrasound, so you have, they were asking, have you used, the hospitals and the doc
Oh
doc
my God. It was so much better than the US. I was ashamed for the US. When I first got sciatica, I didn't know what it was. I just thought because I, moved that I pulled a muscle or something. I asked for a referral from a girlfriend, and I called up at 8:30 in the morning, an orthopedist. And I said, my hip hurts. When can I see you? And he said, how about 12:30 today, like the same
Wow.
day. And I didn't have to do any paperwork. I didn't have to present anything, any papers. I think I gave my phone number, and maybe my email. That's it. We sat down. He he tested some different movements. He said, you have sciatica, and he charged me $17 cash.
Wow, this is
And he was excellent. And not only that, he gave me follow-up because it didn't get better very quickly. And he gave me follow-up by phone for free for about 5 weeks. At the ultrasound, there was more paperwork, but it was so efficient and so organized. I couldn't believe it. And it was cheap too. But really, the place was so clean. Everyone was in a white coat, including the people who took my credit card information and all that. Um, they were so pleasant. I didn't wait, and I walked out with my films in my hand.
I love
It
it.
was amazing.
We've got more questions, folks, and we're gonna get to these, but I want, especially since I see these beautiful pictures on the screen, keep on telling us your story, and then we'll get to the rest of the questions for sure.
Well, you've really heard most of it. The rest of the story is why I love it here, which you're seeing in the pictures. In the last set of pictures, you saw all the friends that I have, many from different countries, not just the US, but I met two beautiful Spanish women, and I feel very accompanied. But the one thing I guess I would say is I didn't intend to come and hang out with Americans necessarily when I came here. But what I discovered is the kind of people who come here from other countries are adventurous. They are interested in culture. They're open-minded. And so I feel like it was kind of a filter where my people are the ones who came here. And because everyone is new, there's just a whole different collection. One of the other things I love is just the architecture and the beauty. I mean, this is a regular door. This is nothing special. This is somebody's house. Okay.
Hmm.
You go down any street and you have to like stop and take a picture of the door because it's just so beautiful. This is the view from my bedroom.
Oh, nice.
And the weather's fabulous pretty much all the time. Now, every part of Mexico is different. And I really am an advocate of living abroad. You don't have to pick a Latin country. It drew me, but I've heard wonderful things about Italy and Portugal and Latin America, South America. Um, so just to sum up, there are not any mosquitoes, which we have like swarms of them in Memphis. It's like, California, which I really grew to love, bright sunshine and blue sky all the time. And here it's just a little more temperate and a little more consistent. Um, I already talked about the Latin culture and how warm and caring it is. And then the lifestyle in particular here is very driven by artists. It was populated, the expats who came here first were artists. So there's a lot of art, there's a cultural activity all the time, performances, wellness and spirituality is very big here. And as I was just saying, the expats are the cream of the crop of Americans, in my opinion. And the rest is more pictures. So just ask questions. This is the Day of the Dead. That's me.
Oh, well. The okay, well, we got tons of questions, so let's I'm going to
Okay, go
start
for
going
it.
through these. Let's see here. Where do I start? Okay. Okay, so have you moved there permanently? And again, how long have you lived there? I know you said that, but I think a few people missed it.
I've been here a year, and it was a year last October. If you count, I spent 2 months here checking it out. I went back to Memphis and sold my house. No, I don't necessarily think it's a permanent move, but it could be. The one thing I still have to sort out is both the insurance and for my sciatica, there are cobblestones. And this is not something, again, blessed illness that gave me previews. It wouldn't have occurred to me to think about the cobblestones if I hadn't gotten the hip pain. And so, if you're thinking for the long term, I think besides health insurance, walkability and a walkability that could take a walker or a rollator, should you have that kind of uh, thing in your family history. The other thing is we are at altitude here, which is fine for me, but it turns out I've been at altitude lots of times in my life, but now that I have blood pressure issues, I notice it takes me a little longer
Okay.
to get used to the
But
altitude.
but it sounds like now that you have sort of dipped your toe in the expat lifestyle as a solo
Oh yeah.
agent, it's created more
Oh,
adventure. And yet,
I'm never gonna live unless I like win the lottery. I can't see going back to the US. My finances are great here, but they're not resolved to where I could afford to live in the US.
and
But having experienced it, I want to be in a Spanish speaking country.
okay,
And I'm going to keep checking them out. Spain is the
okay,
next. Peru, I love seeing my family, but I don't think it's going to be a fit for me. Health insurance is an issue there too.
all right. And the next question is relates to the finances. After caregiving for other family members, how have you repaired or addressed your financial concerns about the underfunded retirement and budget? And somebody else was asking, how much approximately do you spend per month kind of living in the environment that you're in, if you're willing to share sort of some insights on that.
Well, I absolutely am willing to share. So, first of all, I would say the finances are still a work in progress. I lost a lot of money during my caregiving and my illness years, and my run rate in the US for only maintaining my home was about $3,500 a month just for the house, not my food, just the mortgage and the utilities and that sort of thing. Here I pay about 3,000 to 3,500 a month for all of my expenses. My rent is $340 a month. And I live in a beautiful condo with a swimming pool and a gym. And that includes my utilities, my internet, my cable, all of that, water and gas. But San Miguel de Allende, because of all of its sort of California-like features and high number of expats, is not as inexpensive as other places. What first inspired me many, many years ago was a friend of mine from the Bay Area moved to Ajijic, which is about 45 minutes outside of Guadalajara, which is the most incredibly wonderful, beautiful city. And it's much cheaper there. And there are a lot of English speakers. It's much cheaper there. So so two of the books that I have in the last couple of slides are three of them. All three of them are stories of people and what do they spend and where do they live. And two are Mexico, but one is worldwide. And I do think that expenses vary. I know a lot of people who have gone to Portugal because it's very inexpensive and has a lot of these advantages. And I think a lot depends on what city you choose, which depends on what lifestyle you want and what interests you.
Okay, yeah, that's really good. $300 for rent. I think everybody can agree that that's our Starbucks budget for a lot of people each month.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
only thing that's more expensive is gasoline for the car is a
Oh,
fair
well,
amount more expensive.
now, do you drive? Do you have a car down there?
My roommate shares her car with me, so
Oh,
we split the expenses of the car 50-50.
okay. All right, let me keep on going through these questions. These are great. Cost of medications. You talked about,
Oh,
and we
it's so
hear
cheap,
often that
so
prescriptions are
cheap,
cheaper if you pay health
so
insurance.
much cheaper.
Yeah.
Now I came here with my 3 month supply. Um, and and I was trying to be very careful and I worked with my doctor to make sure I had enough when I came for my visit, when I was testing the waters. And yeah, like stuff that I pay $120 for in the US, I'll pay like $4 for here.
Holy
I mean,
cow.
it's outrageously cheap. Yeah, and not only that, not that this is necessarily a good thing, but you just go to the pharmacy and ask for it. The only thing that you need a doctor's prescription for is narcotics like barbiturates
Okay.
or sleeping medication. But if you want to self-medicate on antidepressants, take your pick and go ask for it. They'll just give it to you. No, it's so
Well,
dirt cheap that it's amazing. Yeah, it's crazy.
okay. Someone says if this isn't too personal, do you practice Judaism? And have you found a community there?
No, not at all. I actually don't practice Judaism because my mother was Catholic and my father was Jewish. But my father, despite being persecuted by the Nazis, was always non-practicing. He considered himself agnostic. However, there is a Jewish community here. I haven't been to the synagogue, but I literally was just coming home from ceramics class talking about the current situation with Israel and Gaza with another Jewish woman. Oh, and also so two of my friends in my close-knit community are Jewish. Um, and you can pretty much find all the religions here. The non-Catholic Christianity in this particular small town, it's only about 200,000 people, so it's very different in bigger towns. But here we have it's sort of like they call it a community church, and every month they have someone from a different Christian religion, so we get sort of a range. But
Um,
in terms of
great,
Jews, yes, there are Jews here.
great. Let's see. What has your experience been related to telecommunications and technology, i.e., internet, smartphones, etc.? You seem to be logged in just fine here with us today.
And thank the gods for that because it's not windy. It
Oh, okay.
depends. It depends on a few things. I would say it's not as strong as the US, but it generally is. So because I have a lovely condo with a pool, I'm a little bit further outside of town. And there aren't as many cell signals here, and our internet is provided by a cell provider. So just here out of town, when it's windy, it can be a problem. Um, so Wi-Fi is great, and everyone uses WhatsApp here, and that works great. However, uh, if you this took me a long time to learn. If you see on a Google Maps the hours of a place, you know how you'll find them, it says the hours. Well, that has nothing to do with reality. In fact, nothing on the internet in Mexico has anything to do with reality, and that's too bad. But yeah, people are not as used to maintaining their websites. In the US, work is top priority. Here, it's family, then it's friends, and work is at the bottom, and keeping your internet up is not that terrific. However, I have a great situation with my iPhone because I have two. I have a virtual SIM, which has my Verizon US account, which is free in Mexico. I mean, it's the same cost as, in the US. And then I also have a SIM card in the extra slot with a Mexican phone number if I ever find myself having a problem. There are two vendors, only two, that I can't get my online orders through unless they verify me on a Mexican phone number. So
Hmm.
I have both, and that's easy and cheap. Um, so for the most part, it's good. The thing, like anything in Mexico, is you can't count on things being like the US in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. And, I'm German, half German, right? And so that gets to me sometimes.
Yes.
Um, and I want to answer a question no one has asked me, which is, what are the downsides? Because everyone is asking great questions, but the one thing I wanted to make sure that people got is, when you're not in the US, you're not in the US. And, there are things that really bother me, like, right down the highway that goes past my condo where it says no passing, it's a 2-lane highway. Everybody drives in the emergency lane. And I asked my roommate, why are we driving in the emergency lane? She's like, well, that's so people can pass. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, I'm not going to condone this. And then I realized, uh-oh, they're passing on the head-on, from the other side, and they're going to hit me unless I get over in the emergency lane. So traffic rules in all of Latin America, I would say, are considered suggestions.
Yeah.
Um, uh, they have because Mexicans feel that way about traffic, they put speed bumps and everywhere, and they're all varying heights, some of which will send you flying. But the ones that really got me are the ones on the freeway.
Whoa.
On the freeway. I was on the freeway, and thank God all the cars in front of me were suddenly slowed down. I'm like, oh, there must be an accident or a dead dog or something. No, they were the speed bumps on the freeway. So there are things, and then the notion of time is very different throughout Latin America. In Mexico, it's different than in Peru. They're a mix of people being on time, but they have this thing called reconfirming. So if you make a date, if you haven't reconfirmed the date, they assume you're not coming. So, there are things that are different.
Little
And,
cultural
I do get
differences. Yeah.
tired of tortillas after a while, and I can't find good Chinese food to save my life.
Well,
But, all the other things for me make it worthwhile, but I also move
yeah.
around a little bit if I get too antsy.
So here's a question from Linda, and I dropped into chat a discussion that we had with an editor from the newsletter International Living. I'm curious how
Hmm.
you answer this question because we had it there too. Did you look into retirement communities in Mexico or care facilities? Have you heard anything about assisted living or home health and things like that?
I have, because initially, especially when I came here for the trial period, I think of this as more of an investigation as a final decision. And just like in the US, they're all different kinds with different kinds of lifestyles. But I have a friend here, a neighbor, whose mother is in a nursing home in the next biggest town. And so I did a long interview with him. He took me along, did a long interview with the administrator there. And it's so much more inexpensive. The most significant statistic I can give you is this. In Memphis, where it's not as expensive as in California, we were paying 35 an hour for our caregiver for our dad with a 4-hour minimum. That's $150 about. Um, Here, it's $20 for the whole day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. They're with you for $20 a day. So
Wow.
that's home health care. In the assisted living, I actually got the opportunity to see two in person, um, both of which I would consider the lower end of the budget because that's where I was looking. Um, the one was where my friend's mom was originally, and I found it depressing, though it was sufficient. There was care around the clock. There were outings. The building and the grounds were depressing. She
So the
subsequently moved to a different one, which is very comfortable, very nice. And it's one full-time caregiver, 24 hours, sleeps there for 4 patients. And it's probably, let me think about the costs were something around 1,000 a month, all in food,
yeah.
everything.
So
So it's much now. They're nicer ones. And a good friend of mine, she lives in one of the nice ones, and they have hot tubs and a sweat lodge. It's a little bit out of town, but it's quite pricey. It would be out of my range, but it wouldn't be out of, if you have a sort of a normally funded retirement, it would a lot would be accessible, but the key thing is that lots of areas do have different pricing. So that's one of the things I've thought about is to go to Ajijic, where my friend is, and look around at the nursing homes there.
now, Dan, who was the Preshner, who was the editor from International Living, one of the things that he shared when this question came up was that the assisted livings and maybe the nursing homes, we're more used to them here in this culture, and that's what he said was what his response was that housekeepers and cooks oftentimes are hired for a very affordable rate for an elder in their home, and they
Mhm.
oftentimes transition to in-home care for a very affordable rate. Have you seen anything like that down there?
Oh, absolutely. That is the majority. That's a really, really the most common situation. And to me, there are a lot of older people here in San Miguel, and primarily solo ager women. And I've seen lots of people with their, used to be housekeeper um, as their full-time attendant pushing their wheelchair. Because one of the most expensive things is all those things that the kids do. They get you to the doctor, they give you the extra bath, they, hand you things you can't reach. And that's the $20 a day person.
It's
We pay less than that for our maid. We have Now, I wouldn't get her necessarily. My roommate is kind of cleanliness obsessive, but she comes 3 days a week to clean her house.
And how much does
And
that cost?
I mean, it costs let's see, $100 a week.
Wow, so $30 a day. Uh,
Yeah.
okay. Folks, I knew this was we're gonna have tons of questions, and I want to remind everybody this
Well,
is
and
recorded.
people,
This is
yeah, people
recorded.
can,
Well,
yeah,
hold on.
people can reach me too. I do want to show the books that I recommended. The resources, the two best resources, I would say the International Living Magazine, and then Pinterest is full of stuff. There are these books. You're welcome to share the slides.
Yeah, I've
Um,
been cutting and pasting these in.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So these are the books that I recommend, and then just a little thing. The kind of the whole adventure started because since I found myself alone as a solo ager, I am in the very early stages of putting together a network of solo agers and the companies that provide services and information to them, because I think there are a lot of us. We all need help. It's a big job and we can't do it together without doing it together. But in terms of your own exploration, uh, International Living Magazine, Pinterest, and these books will give you a start, but also you feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to anyone by email or even make a Zoom date. And yeah, do
I
it.
love
At
it.
least go experiment,
No, I
travel.
love it.
See
And
things.
and can you hang on for a few more minutes and we'll get through the rest of the questions?
Oh, I stay as long as you want.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So folks, if you need to jump off because you only budgeted an hour, remember this will be recorded and I'm going to just keep on going through the questions and we'll do as much as we can for the next 15 minutes and then we'll put a fork in it here. Okay, so is there a tourist culture in San Miguel?
Oh yeah. There's quite a tourist culture. So Travel and Leisure magazine has picked San Miguel as the best city to visit for 11 years straight or 9 years straight, something like that. So there are a lot of tourists. They tend to come in certain seasons. And one of the biggest tourist attractions here is people come for destination weddings here. So there are a lot of things to see, but as a local, you know when to avoid if it's a holiday. The other big tourists come from Mexico City. So in my condo complex, we're probably only about 30% occupied year round because most of the condos are owned by big city Mexicans who come for Day of the Dead and Easter and all the holidays.
Okay. Um, let's see. This is a couple of really good questions here. Karen's asking about African Americans. Do you see any diversity like that? And she's asking the question because she's part of that population.
It's not as diverse as in certain parts of the US, but that's where I would look at different cities for different things. Um, because, in Memphis, Tennessee, it's 65% African American. This is actually the majority in other parts of the South. In the Bay Area, I found that although there were more African Americans in my everyday walk of life, I didn't come across a representative population. Here, there are a lot more than in Peru. I couldn't give you the percentage. That's one
Okay.
thing. But it is mixed. In Peru, I was there for 6 weeks and I realized that I'd only seen one African American the whole time I was there. And that
Now,
shocked me.
but do you find that it's is there is there discrimination, not just to get like do you find it to be an inclusive community and
Mexico,
welcoming diversity?
Mexico, Mexican culture, unlike Peruvian, they're very polar opposite in this way. Mexican culture is extremely open-minded about skin color.
Mhm.
Because the history of Mexico was occupied by different countries, and there was a lot of intermixing between the indigenous people and the Spaniards and the French and all the people who came here. So culturally, yes, and San Miguel de Allende in particular is extremely open-minded, populated by a bunch of artists from the 60s that influenced the culture here.
Oh,
So
and
I
that
would say it's
probably
diverse.
more
I would
progressive
say
too.
don't go to Peru because it's not. It's very
Okay.
classist still.
Let's see. A question about would your community where you live, Linda's asking, would San Miguel be okay for a person who does not drive?
As long as you live in town and can walk well. It's
Okay.
hilly. Most expats live in town in order not to have a car, and
Okay.
most of the activities are in town. So absolutely. Um, and there are advantages to not having a car.
Now, anytime we have a solo aging discussion, the topic of making friends comes up. Someone asks, how did you make so many close friends in just a year?
It is such a great question, and I think it's the number one solo ager issue, and it's what is the driving force for where I will ultimately end up. Um, who who it is that becomes your family, that's important. I'm extroverted, so that gave me an advantage, but it has been an ongoing process. What I did, it was so funny. I took a ceramics class and I'm really bad at handiwork. And I'm like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do ceramics. And I said, I won't make any friends if I don't join. And it turns out I love ceramics. And I was lucky in having a roommate who had some connections. And we made a point to meet neighbors. But if you're not extroverted naturally, then you have to get involved in something, and it takes effort. For me, it's a constant effort because it seems like a lot of friends, but I still don't see people regularly enough. I don't have a bestie who hears my confidences.
Mhm.
And there are a lot more women than men, though I'm grateful to have a couple of men friends. Um, it's the number one issue. It's one of the reasons I want Team Solo Ager to be a place where people can meet other people. The challenge is you want to meet them locally because seeing people in
Yeah.
person. Um, but the other thing is keeping up with friends across the states and the world by phone, which is a discipline you have to actually put in place. But to meet people, um, classes and getting out there, we have my roommate and I have a friend that we met only because we were sitting next to each other at the main square watching a free live performance and got to chatting, and we exchanged phone numbers. Now, I do find all the expats and the Mexicans to be much more open than the people in the US in terms of making sure to get your contact information and then following up because there's a higher priority on relationship here.
Great, great. Okay, and then let's see, I'm getting through these folks. I dropped a comment from Diane who was in San Miguel, and she said taxis are about $4 to $6 anywhere. I didn't have a car and needed a taxi. I ultimately found a great taxi group who were professional and consistent in pricing. Um, let's see. And okay, now your roommate, did your roommate already have a condo, or did you both try find a place and you're both paying rent?
We both, she did all the looking because I was in Memphis,
Okay.
but she had moved here from Mexico City. And so she said, okay, this is it. I'm either getting a 3 bedroom so that we can share, or a 2 bedroom for me in my office if you're not committed. And I said, go ahead and sign me up. So we both, she pays more than I do. She has more of the space than I do. And she's furnished it, which was helpful because it does cost. I did pay, a fair amount just to get my books and technical equipment and clothes down here.
Okay, and somebody asked, Virginia asked, are biologic medicines available in Mexico? And I wasn't sure what biologics were, but they are medications that come from living sources. They're more complex than other medicines and tend to be more expensive. Out of curiosity, have you researched biologics in Mexico, and have you seen better pricing there too?
That's an area I'm not familiar with. However, the wellness culture here is so advanced, it wouldn't surprise me if it were available. Mexico City, I expect you can get anything there. It's, 13 million people that live there. So, but I can't really answer that. I will say that I have found some cheaper ways to get things here from the US that I can't locate here. And that's probably an option as well.
Couple of good questions from Elva. And one is any issues with scammers trying to take advantage of people? I know when I traveled to Mexico City, I was warned to be sure not to use the sanction taxi, not just to get into any auto. Going in a government sanctioned taxi guaranteed the rate of my destination. Have you seen any scamming or things of that nature?
Scamming is definitely something that could come up. San Miguel is like any small town in that it's just a lot more neighborly. So it's not something that I've heard a lot about. In Peru, I had to be very careful, I know, and I would be just as careful in Mexico City because it's a big city.
Mhm.
I do think that there are gringo prices in places that you would go. And but no, I think it can come up. But it's not something that is a big warning around here.
And then Elva also says, how about import taxes? One of the things I would miss is being able to order books and other things on Amazon. Although I guess Kindle would be a good option, but have you found that like ordering
There's certain things. Yeah, there's certain things. Here's what I do. I use Amazon Mexico and Amazon US, and I always compare the prices because the import tax shows up. If you have Prime, you're getting the shipping free. So it doesn't, the shipping from the US to Mexico isn't free, but I actually found that buying my low-end lawn furniture for our upstairs terrace was cheaper from the US, even counting the shipping.
Hmm.
Anything electronic has a stiff tax on it. And anything that has a low cost can be cheaper than the actual shipping. So what I do now is I have everything that I order from the US shipped to a service in Laredo, Texas. And they put it on a truck and they deliver it to a shopping center near my house. And they have 3 locations in San Miguel. It only goes from Laredo to San Miguel.
Hmm.
It's cheap, but it also adds about 15 days to getting the package. I just started using it, but that was my solution. And for books, I use Kindle, but a lot of Amazon Mexico is is accessible. Not everything has an import tax, mostly electronics.
Okay. And let's see. Virginia asks, do you use
Oh,
local
oh,
bank?
one good note. There's a Costco and a Sam's Club, not in San Miguel, but an hour away, and a
Wow.
Walmart.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And on that note, like, do you use local banks and local credit cards? How do you do that?
That's a really good question. So I'm going to try to give you a quick answer. You can write me and I can tell you more if you want more details. So what I do, because I'm not a resident, I'm a visitor. So what I do is I use my US accounts and I use an ATM, finding the one that has the lowest rates, and I get my cash, the ATM converts it. In the conversion, you always want to decline the conversion rate offered by the ATM or the local bank. That is one place where they will stiff foreigners. And so if you decline the local conversion, your own bank's conversion rate will apply, and it's always better. What people who are residents, which would be like having a green card, what they do is they get a local bank. A local bank will be cheaper from the viewpoint of the ATM fees and all of that sort of thing. But you need to go through the paperwork that any resident would. So to become a resident, there's some income requirements and some savings requirements to qualify. Then you have to get a series of different identity cards. Your voter registration card is one of your primary identity cards that you would need to get a bank account. And one of the things that I'm not a fan of in Mexico is that most such transactions must be done in person and can't be done online. So there's a lot of in-person paperwork to do to get a local bank. I find it works fine to work with the US, though I did have to get VPN in order to do my online banking because my US banks, in particular Bank of America, considered, to be an international bank, was very unfriendly to doing anything like even making a deposit. But with VPN, no problem.
This is a good question. Do you have to leave the country every 6 months in order to not overstay your visa, or do you need a visa at all?
I do need a visa and I do need to leave every 6 months. One of my returns, I haven't been here that long, so it's been a few times only. One of my returns, I found that they wanted to limit me. Fortunately, I overheard someone else getting limited in the length of time that they were staying here. And if you are visiting family, so there's so many Americans with Mexican family, they don't give you a problem. So now I make sure to say that. They are working to reduce how much time you can stay here because many people have moved to Mexico City. Different lifestyle, wonderful lifestyle if you've got the budget. But I'm not secure that I won't have a problem another time at this point in time, but so far.
Yeah, that's what the retirement living editor said, is that there's wonderful aspects to this international lifestyle, but the thing that is just unknown is changes in the political climate and things of that nature.
Well, right now, my sense of the American political climate makes
yeah,
any other country seem preferable on that score.
yeah, and yeah, I say that tongue in cheek, but I think more like you would go leave to come back to the US, and for some reason entry back into whatever country you're in is compromised.
It's not it's definitely a risk. I know that my neighbors, a husband and wife, were separated during COVID for just that reason. She had gone back to California and then she couldn't get back to be with him. So,
Hmm,
that's how he became our friend. Is
okay.
that he didn't have his wife. Yeah, it's a risk. But I think I think it's a fairly minimal one. And I
Okay.
would say you have family here if you are specifically working with Mexico.
Okay, and then let's wrap this up. I see it's about 1:15, but I got just a couple of questions here. This one could probably take 15 minutes, but do you have any idea why, like you sort of explained it in the beginning, but they were asking why is health insurance an issue? Um, and is it considered universal health care down there in Mexico?
Well, they have universal health care, and this is something that I'm not going to comment on every Latin American country, but having just been to Peru and asked all these questions, I'll compare it to Peru. It it's uh it's not comparable care to private care. In Peru, the distinction between the public health care and the clinics is dramatic. Like you would not want to go to public health care in Peru at all.
Okay.
Um, but private health care is reasonably cost, has a reasonable cost. And if you went to the public health care system, it depends what you had, whether you would be afraid or not. I wouldn't be afraid in Mexico, but I would expect less efficiency and less access. But I do have a lot of Mexican friends, for example, a Mexican friend whose mother is in the assisted living. There are a number of things she gets from the state, where as in Peru, my worker for my aunt got absolutely nothing for his autistic child. No, special education or therapy or anything like that. Um, it varies country by country, but at least in those two countries, you can get some care. And if you break your leg, you're going to be fine. It'll be cheap. They'll airlift you for like $150. Um, so yeah, on the whole, I mean, it's all a question of risk, really, at the end of the day. Depends how risk averse you are. Um, I'm not worried about anything except for heart attack.
Okay.
And I'm eating right.
Well, and I'm going to finish on the last question, which is food, eating, cooking, highlights. We all love good food. Any comments about the food? I guess you said, hard to get a good Chinese meal, lots of tortillas, but any comments about food?
San Miguel is one of the culinary capitals. I have had better meals here because I could actually afford them than I have in the San Francisco Bay Area because they have incredible chefs for the tourists and the weddings. But Mexican culture is very much of a foodie culture. They don't say farm to table, they say farm to fork. In Mexico, there's some renowned chefs. And when I've been to Mexico City, fortunately, my roommate is also a foodie, though she's a much healthier eater normally than I am. But when we went to Mexico City, we also had some terrific meals. But that's why I keep saying San Miguel is a lot like California because as a foodie, but I will say, it's all Mexican food. In the regular nice restaurants, but they have foreign food. So you go and look for it. I can get Lebanese, I can get Thai, I can get Vietnamese. Um, all the Asian, I would say here in San Miguel is not as great, but I go an hour away when I'm going to the Costco and I go get Chinese food in the town I fly in and out of, which is called Querétaro, which is with a Q, and it's about 2 million people. And so if I'm missing something, I can go there. But here, regular, like the tacos, that's considered late night food after dancing. They're so dirt cheap and they're so good. Of course, they're nothing like any taco you would have in America, even if you're not going to Taco Bell. So yeah, the food in all of Mexico is phenomenal, and it's very varied for different regions as well.
Wow. Man, well, this has been a very interesting discussion, and I thanks to everybody who hung on. I think you were all just as interested as I was. Beatrice, what a great story. Not, I mean, the international living component is definitely a strong theme in your story. But what I really like, and what I like about all of our solo aging discussions, is that you were empowered. Like you had a budget, you had loss and grief, and you needed to reinvent your life, and you've taken ownership of it. You still got questions that you're asking, but your story really reflects on the opportunity that we all have to kind of get outside of our box, but plan ahead, think about the future. Not thinking about it doesn't mean that bad things are going to happen. It just means that you're going to be less prepared. And I love all of this. It's wonderful.
This is why I love working with you, Steve. You so get it. And I think you hit on the absolute key, which is if you're going to be a victim of the fact that your life doesn't look like what you want it to look like for now or for the future, um, or if you're going to say, well, these are some big problems, I'm going to figure out how to solve them. I really do think that together there are ways, that's why I think it all comes down to the who. If I find a who of some other solo agers, we can do it together and figure it out. So absolutely,
Yeah.
I became empowered and I went from being a victim to being very, very blessed.
And you said something that strikes a chord, because like our last solo aging discussion, I just had like an open forum, and we had all these faces on the screen, and everybody was talking about loneliness, isolation, all the things that all of us are dealing with, and fear of the future. And it's like, we're all talking about how we're lonely, isolated, and we feel like we're on an island alone. But look at how many other faces are on here, and how many people are on this call. Is that there's other people that are going through the same situation, and if we can connect and become roommates or friends or just communicate, it can make a huge difference. And Beatrice has given us her contact info, folks. So if there's things that resonate with you, reach out to her, because she's there as somebody who can be a resource as well.
I'd love to hear from anyone and, pass people on who didn't attend.
Yep.
Share this with anybody who has an interest. Let's be a team and
Yeah.
let's
Team
uh
Solo
let's
Ager. I
help each
like it.
other.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, everybody have a great day. Thank you, Beatrice, and thank you to everybody with all
Thank
the
you, Steve,
wonderful
for the
questions.
opportunity and for all that you do.
You
So
bet.
many fabulous discussions. I can't even keep up with all the ones I want to watch still.
All right. We'll see y'all
All
later.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.